Well, hello again, everyone. Looks like we haven't all melted. Now, it kind of seems funny to have this fire out here. You got to stay a little farther away from it tonight, because you sure don't need the heat. I think it's only gotten down to like 68 degrees tonight, so... Well, it's still just as fun. It's glad to have y'all around, and it's always good to see you and tell stories and talk to one another, or see your old friends, so that's what we're doing. And tonight, I want to tell you a story. It comes from a book by Rusty Wilson. He calls it the Bigfoot Avalanche. It's kind of interesting. Let's hear about it. Now, here it is. It says here, I've never told this story to anyone before tonight, except my daughter. I've always figured people would say I was just plumb nuts. Well, maybe I am. But nuts or not, I know what I saw. This was when I was young. I was in my 20s, some 50 years back. I may be an old guy now, but the vision of what I saw is clear as a bell in my mind's eye. I'll never forget it. I can still relive every second of that event as if it had just happened, even though I can't really remember what I had for breakfast. So I'll get on with the story. I'm curious to know what you think. This happened one very cold winter day on Juniper Mountain, northwest Colorado. Now, Juniper Mountain isn't even quite 8,000 feet above sea level, which makes it more of a hill by Colorado standards, but it's called Juniper Mountain, and is really a big, rugged piece of landscape. It looks like something out of a Zane Grey book, with its big, rugged slopes covered by junipers, the sagebrush, with gullies making their ways down from the top. Now, I was working in a small gravel pit there, not too far off of Highway 40, and it was the middle of a typical bitter cold Moffett County winter. It was right before Christmas, and I remember this because, well, we were working until the weather shut us down. And that just happened to be a couple of weeks right after this happened, which was at Christmas. I was running the loader, filling up the county trucks with gravel. The county had hired a bunch of us to do this seasonal job, and all of us were looking forward to getting it done so we could quit for the winter. There were about 10 trucks that would come and they'd go all day, so I kept pretty busy. The county was graveling some of the back roads that the ranchers needed, and everything was way behind. So we were pulling in long hours, trying to get done before the weather changed. Now, my daughter's pretty good on the computer, and last time I was over to her place, she pulled up this program that lets you see places like this from an airplane. I think it's called Google Earth. Anyway, we cruised over there to Juniper Mountain, and if you take a look, you can still see the old gravel pit I was working there off the county road, just a bit from Highway 40, on the northeast ridge of the mountain. Now, most of the guys were staying in an old motel in the little town of Maybell, just down the road a little bit. But I opted to camp out, as I wanted to save my money. Everyone said I was crazy because it was so cold. But what's new? I grew up in that damn cold country, had spent my life on a ranch, and I was pretty hardy. Plus, I was young and stupid. My mom, she let me take an old feathered bed out there with me, which was great for insulation underneath me, and I had a big Army surplus canvas tent with a small wooden stove. So I wasn't really doing too bad, even though it was getting down below zero every night. Once I got to bed and things got warmed up, I slept pretty okay. It was getting into bed in the evenings and then getting back up in the mornings that was the hard part, because it would be hard to get warmed up in either direction. Well, we had Sundays off, and my folks' ranch was clear down by Hayden, which was a good 40 miles or so away, and I hated to drive home for just one day. My old pickup was on its last legs, and I didn't have any reason to go there anyway, as they would just put me to work on what was supposed to be my day off. So I would just hang around on Sundays, reading old dime westerns, trying to stay warm. We'd had quite a bit of snow back in late November, and it had melted off the roads, so we could still work, but the nearby hills were pretty snowed in with a foot or so, and, well, it was even deeper than that up on Juniper Mountain. And one Sunday, I decided I was damn bored and I needed to go do something, especially something that would help me stay warm. It was a beautiful, crisp winter day, blue skies, and frost hanging in the air. Now, I'd seen the flanks of Juniper Mountain up behind me since I'd started the job. And that day, I just decided I wanted to go walk up it and see the view from the top. I found out later that there's an old dirt road that climbs up it from the other side, but that was too far from where I was at anyways. I just headed straight out and started climbing. There was snow on the ground, but it had crusted enough that I could walk on top of it mostly, and it wasn't more than a foot deep anyway, so I just plowed on through the sagebrush and up the side of that mountain. The top was maybe 2,000 or 3,000 feet above me at the most. Well, looks can be deceiving when you scope something out from a distance, and sure enough, that mountain had some pretty good gullies going here and there that I had to navigate my way through. Mostly just climbing down one side and back up the other. Of course, the snow was a lot deeper in the shadowy side of things, as the sun doesn't get far enough north to melt things that time of year. So some of those gullies were kind of hard to get back out of. I had stuck a couple of sandwiches in the pocket of my coat. When I had finally made it about 2/3 of the way up that mountain, I sat down on a rock and I had some lunch. Of course, as I climbed higher in altitude, the snow, it got deeper. And by this time I was about to give it up, as the snow was now a couple of feet thick and hard going, and it was getting into the late afternoon. Well, I just sat there, eating, enjoying the views, which were pretty darn good. The country out there is still pretty wild, and there really aren't many people around. It's sheep and cattle country, and in the winter, about all you ever see is the occasional rancher driving into town for groceries. And back then, it was even less populated. It's a big sky kind of place. Lots of barren sagebrush hills and pronghorn antelope. Feels kind of like you're in Wyoming instead of Colorado. I just sat there, figuring I'd head back down when things changed. All of a sudden, I started feeling like I was being watched. It was the darndest thing, sitting up there on the side of that mountain, nobody around for miles, in the snow, feeling like something's watching you. Didn't make much sense, but then I started wondering if a mountain lion might be around. That country has mountain lions at its higher elevations, where there's deer and such. So I figured that must be what was spooking me. It's not really bear country, as it's just too dry and bears need water. But a big cat can range pretty far, and the Yampa River wasn't all that far away. But all the deer were now in the lower country, so why would a lion be hanging around up there? I stood up slowly and started looking all around, trying to spot where that lion might be hiding. I figured it must be up above me, as there were a couple of small rock cliffs towards the top of the mountain. I turned and I scouted those cliffs. I couldn't see anything, but I know lions blend in with their background pretty darn well. And for the life of me, that feeling of being watched just kept getting stronger. I couldn't see any reason for it. I was getting so uncomfortable that I decided I'd better head on out. I had an old rifle down in my tent, but it sure wasn't going to do me any good up here. I stood up to go when I heard it. It sounded like a woman screaming, like she was being murdered. And I know cougars make a sound like that. I'd heard it myself more than once back on the ranch. So at first I thought, yep, that's a mountain lion. So get out now, but don't run, as that triggers their kill instinct. I started down the side of that mountain, and the snow was deep enough that I was almost skiing or glissading down it. Then I heard that sound again, like a woman screaming, but this time it was different. It ended in a deep bass sound, and it wasn't like any cougar I'd ever heard. I swear, the sound just hung there in that frost crystals like a cloud. It just went on and on with incredible volume and lung capacity, even though it came from the distance. Oh, I was completely out of my element here. My mind kept saying it's a cougar, but the rest of me said, that ain't no cougar. That's something you've never encountered before and you don't want to. Now, I grew up out in that wild country, and this was a sound just completely new to me. Well, I started hoofing it down that mountain even faster, nervously looking behind me practically every other step. It doesn't take nearly as long to get down as it does to go up, and I was about halfway back down when I noticed something over to my right, just about even with me, that didn't look good. There was something black over there, and it was big, and it was paralleling me down the mountain. When I would stop to take a look behind me, it would stop, so that it was staying right even with me, but about 100 yards away, just far enough that I couldn't really make out what it was, but I could tell how big it was in comparison to the juniper trees that spotted the mountainside. This thing was big, really big. Well, my first thought was, how in the heck did a big black bear get out here, and why isn't it in hibernation? That country is high desert, and the nearest bear country is Black Mountain over east, over by the town of Craig, or the Uintas over by Utah to the northwest. But none of it was less than 40 miles or so away. That's a long ways for a bear to hike. My second thought was, how long is that darn bear going to walk on its hind legs like that before it gets tired? Bears usually walk on all four. And my third thought wasn't a thought at all. It was more of an emotion. The thing had turned enough towards me and was looking at me. And I could see that it didn't have any fur on its face. And what little I could make out of its face looked awfully human. The only consolation I had at that very moment was that I was only about a mile from my camp, and there was a fairly deep gully between me and this thing. I knew because I had tried to cut across that way, and it was deep enough that I didn't want to try it when I could see it. It was also filled up with snow, which had apparently avalanched down from the top some time ago, probably after the last snowstorm we've had. Well, I kept on going, and when I looked again, I was terrified. The thing was cutting over towards me, and it looked like it had plenty of intent, like it knew I was there and was planning an ambush or something. Why else would it be cutting across towards me? And it looked really angry. Every once in a while, it would stop and tear off a large branch from a juniper tree and heave it towards me, even though it wasn't close enough to reach me. I would have stopped and kicked myself for not bringing my rifle, but I was just in too much of a hurry. Now this thing let out a shriek, and it chilled me to my bones. It didn't sound anything like before, like a woman screaming, but instead it sounded like a madman ready to murder someone, and I figured that someone was me. The creature came to the gully and dropped down into it to cross, but then I wasn't really all that far away from it, and I knew this was my only chance, so I started running as fast as I could while it was down there and couldn't see me. Maybe I could get far enough down the hill that I would lose it. I was literally shaking. I was so terrified. But then I heard what sounded like a rifle shot. Was one of the other guys out here on his day off and had seen the beast and was shooting at it? Now, the odds of that were pretty slim, but my mind was trying to figure out why I had just heard a rifle shot. And then I heard a roaring sound, and I knew what had happened. The beast had triggered an avalanche in the gully, and I could see a blue and white snow cloud rising up. It was a steep chute, and even without a lot of snow, it had the capacity to avalanche, which then I figured it did. But was the beast caught in it? I wasn't going to stick around and find out. I can't tell you how fast I ran down that mountain, but it was record-breaking for me. I got to my tent and I grabbed my rifle, then stood by my truck and watched in the direction I'd just come. Nothing. Not a sound or sight of anything. I was beside myself. Had I really seen this thing coming after me? Had I been drinking and forgot I'd been drinking? I just stood there shaking for the longest time. Then I did something really stupid. I decided to go back and see what had happened. I think having that rifle gave me more courage than I normally had, but I also think I needed to know what was going on to be able to stay there and sleep at night. I actually, in retrospect, would have been smarter to just pack up and leave right then. But then again, that's never been one of my stronger departments, the brains. So I quickly made my way over to where the gully came down off the mountainside. I wanted to see up into it a ways, enough to figure out what was going on, so I kind of angled towards it. Well, I hadn't gone very far when I saw exactly what had happened. This black thing had triggered an avalanche all right, and there he was, all hung up on top of a small cliff where a juniper tree brought down by the snow was wedged. The only thing keeping him from coming on off and falling a good 40 feet or more, which I was sure would kill even a big guy like him. Now I keep in mind that today, I would call this a Bigfoot. But at the time, nobody in that part of the country had even heard of such a thing. So I had no idea what I was looking at. And no matter what it was, I had to feel just a bit sorry for it. I could understand what it would feel like to be hung up there like that, just minutes from your death, no idea what to do. That affected me. And like I said, he seemed almost human. I just stood there watching, and not really sure what to do, when the most heart-rending moaning came out of his chest. You could tell he was frightened, and I figure he deserved what he got since he was coming after me. But to leave him there, alone, to probably freeze to death or worse, to starve to death, unless he got loose and fell first, was something I just couldn't do. And yet I had no idea how to help him. And if I did, would he then come after me again? Quite the quandary, but the problem solved itself, I'm happy to say. As I stood there watching, I noticed the sun went down over the horizon. It suddenly got very cold. I don't know if that made that snow contract or something, but I could see a trickle of snow coming down the chute. And this soon turned into another small avalanche, which swept all around the creature as he hung on for dear life to that wedged tree. I was sure to be swept over the edge. The snow soon stopped, and he was still hanging there, but another tree had come down and wedged itself against the first tree. And as I watched, this huge beast managed to twist himself around, using his arms and legs like a gorilla would, and pull himself up onto the second tree, which then gave him a means to leap to the edge of the gully. It was quite an athletic feat. No human could have ever done it, but he really did remind me of a giant monkey. Well, I was glad to see him free, but now I was back to my original worries of whether or not he was going to come after me. I ran over to my truck and I got in it, turning it around, ready to head out, but I could now see him running down the hill and to the west, away from me. I sighed a sigh of relief, glad that he'd lost interest, and I sat there for a few minutes, watching to see if he'd come back. Then I drove back to camp, took down my tent, broke camp, then drove on into Maybelle, where I stayed at the motel each night until the job shut down. The boys, they asked me why I'd moved into town, and I told them I was tired being the first and last one at work every day. They laughed, and I never did tell them the truth. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. I'm sure glad my daughter did when I told her years later. And I will say that I carried that rifle with me on the loader every day and have never been as happy since to leave a place. Yeah, there you go. Sounds like a pretty scary deal there. That avalanche might have saved his life. You know, that's a good story, and it's a good thing he remembered it. It's a good thing he told his daughter, right? We might never have heard that story. So you get a chance, you send a story in. It'd be fun. I'd love to read one of your stories, folks. It makes it more fun, right? Well, let's do this again. It's going to be summer for a while yet, so not much else we're going to be doing. Come on around. I'll see you next time. This is Clay Steele.